All right, we'll start recording to the cloud. And if we want to let people in, we can let them in. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our 5th session of the Black Angels Book Club event. My name is Dr. Danielle McCamey, and I'm the founder, CEO, and president of DNPs of Color. And just so excited to share another Saturday with you all today. Before we get started, I do want to pass the mic over to Miss Virginia to offer us a few words before she has to leave out on her wonderful day to start Women's History Month. Miss Virginia?
Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here with you today. It's raining out, but we have to forge through the rain. I'm going to be at a program this afternoon honoring nurses, and it's the same nurses that are listed in the book, including myself, the Black Angels, the nurses who helped to find the cure of tuberculosis at St. Philip's Baptist Church. It's going to be a lovely presentation from Maurice Milios, the author of the book, and other important healthcare workers in the community of Staten Island, New York. So I'm excited about this event because we will be highlighting the nurses of St. Philip's Baptist Church who actually worked at Seaview Hospital. And hopefully that will be filmed so that we can share it, perhaps at the last meeting of our book club, because it's instrumental in the deep history that of the nurses who worked here, who Maria Smalios interviewed the descendants of. So I look forward to this afternoon, and I'm sure you're going to have a wonderful discussion of the book today.
Thank you so much, Miss Virginia, for always sharing wonderful messages and words of encouragement. And that segues into the reason why we are here today, because of Miss Virginia's charge in ensuring that the legacy of the Black Angels is in front of everyone, in particular in the hearts and minds of nurses, to understand the significant impact that the Black Angel nurses had during the TB pandemic. So thank you to Miss Virginia for charging us with ensuring that this story is elevated, that everyone has the opportunity to read the book, and so that that legacy can be put in its rightful place in our history. So thank you, thank you, thank you again.
You're welcome.
Also, I just want to give a special thanks to everyone that's been collaborating with us on this project. Thank you to the National Commission to Address Racism in Nursing. Thank you to the Black Student Nurses Association at the Johns Hopkins School of Nursing, the National Black Nurses Association, University of Maryland School of Nursing, the Black Nurse Collaborative, the Association of Black Nursing Faculty, Coppin State Helene Fould School of Nursing, and last but not least, Nurses You Should Know. So I'll pass over to Joanna to say hey.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming back this week.
Awesome. So now, without further ado, I want to have us dive into our session. And I will be introducing our speaker for today. Heather Butts is a lecturer and faculty advisor of in the Department of Public Health Management at Columbia University at the Mailman School of Public Health. She teaches bioethics, human resource strategic management, integration of science and practice, and leadership skills. In addition, she serves as adjunct professor in health law and bioethics at St. John's School of Law. Prior to her teaching, she served as a regulatory specialist at the Columbia University's Medical Center Institutional Review Board. Her responsibilities included training and educational efforts of the Columbia University Research community. She has also functioned as a senior associate at PricewaterhouseCoopers LLP in New York, where she performed compliance risk assessments on projects involving reviews of faculty group practices, policies, and procedures. Professor Butts is the co-founder of Health for Youths Incorporated, which is a nonprofit organization that focuses on college readiness and preparation. Her organization partners with 25 programs each year to help out more than 1,000 students achieve their dream of going to college. Her publications include Alexander Thomas Augusta Physician Teacher and Human Rights Activist for the Journal of the National Medical Association. Federal agencies can continue focus on clinical trial oversight, where she was the co-author, housing bias and post-traumatic stress disorder, where she was a co-author, and finally the book African American Medicine in Washington, D.C., Healing the Capital During the Civil War Era. Professor Butts received her Bachelor's of Arts from Princeton University. She was a history major with a concentration in American and African American studies, and she received her Juris Doctor from St. John's University School of Law, her Master of Public Health from Harvard University, and her Master of Education from Teachers College, Columbia University. Let's go, Heather Butts. Yes. So without further ado, it is an honor and pleasure to introduce this amazing human. And thank you so much for being with us, Heather Butts.
Oh my gosh, thank you for that great introduction. I appreciate you, Danielle. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm super happy that my dear friend, Miss Virginia Allen, can spend some time with us today. I see her often in Staten Island, and it's a pleasure to be in her midst here. And then, of course, I want to thank Joanna for being the glue that pulled me into this. We had tried to work on various other projects over the last couple of, gosh, probably years. And I think 2024 is our year, so I'm super excited about it. And I'm thrilled to have been invited to speak to you today. Even though she's not here, I also want to really thank Maria Smelios, because I have gotten to know her and her work. We invited her to Columbia to speak along with Miss Allen. And it's one of those events that people continue to talk about and marvel at. And so I'm really glad that there's a place and space for the work that's being done here. I think it's a little sad to say what I'm going to say, but I think even 15, 20 years ago, we probably wouldn't have been able to get the kind of reception for this work that we have now. We're getting it now. It's a journey, because 20 years from now, we'll probably be saying the same thing about this era. Oh, we couldn't have gotten whatever we're going to get in the future that we're getting now. So it's kind of exciting. It's gratifying, and I'm just really thrilled for us to be able to do this work together. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna walk us through I'm basically gonna walk you through the research that I've done. And I will share my screen, and hopefully you can see it. I can see that you can see it. So what I'm gonna first do is I'm gonna just walk through my work and the research, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna actually walk us through the book. So I looked at all of the presentations, and I took a gander at all of them, and was pretty fascinated by them. And so what I'm going to do is walk us through the presentations, and then basically we're going to open it up to conversation. So I'm not going to try to talk that long. I have way more slides that I can get through, but that's okay, because I'm happy to share those slides. And then we'll open it up for a deeper discussion. So first, what I wanted to talk about is just sort of in the beginning. So this talks a little bit about some of the early Civil War work that I have done and did in the past. Some of these people might be familiar to you. I'm curious, anybody in the audience, if you recognize these people, and if so, if you want to put in the chat who you recognize by name. You recognize any of these people? I know people are putting things in the chat or not. I probably should have been able to actually watch. Oh no, okay, I can see it. I see Abe. Right, exactly. Okay, so there's Abe. Yep, Grant Lincoln. Right, exactly. So most people, when they see this flyer, they're gonna recognize some people. They're not gonna recognize everybody. So we're gonna go through the folks and let you know who's here. So the first person is actually Susie King Taylor. Right. So Susie King Taylor is a she is someone who was a nurse during the Civil War, and we're going to tell her story a little bit more in a minute. But she was a nurse during the Civil War, and she was one of the few people to actually write the memoirs of her life. So she wrote down her story, which is rare. And there's a book where she chronicles her life. So that's Susan King Taylor. Most people recognize Abraham Lincoln. Next to Abraham Lincoln is Ulysses S. Grant. A lot of people recognized him. Next to him is Robert Gould Shaw. So Robert Gould Shaw is of Glory fame. So if anybody saw the movie Glory, that was a movie about Black soldiers during the Civil War, starred Matthew Broderick, and Denzel Washington won his first Academy Award for that, Carrie Elways, and Morgan Freeman. And so that is a um, person who should be known to you, mainly because he is someone who we're going to talk about in terms of the intersection of bringing forth some, dare we say, civil rights to those whose civil rights have been obliterated. And then the last person is Anderson Abbott, who was a contract surgeon during the Civil War. And so we'll talk about his story in a minute. All right, so I wanted to just have you think a little bit about Susie King Taylor. So Susie King Taylor, as I mentioned before, wrote a book about her time during the Civil War. And the title of it is Reminiscence of My Life in Camp with the 33rd. The reason why this is so incredible is mainly because we don't really have a whole lot of work around this. So we don't have a lot of memoirs or reminiscences of individuals that served during the war, and certainly not something that essentially is a roadmap for others who want to tell their stories. And so I think it's important to think about the theme of my talk is really where have we come from, where are we going, and what is the future of that? And so Susie King Taylor and the Civil War nurses, which I write about in one of my books. There's a whole chapter just devoted to nurses during the war. And that really is important for us to think about where we have come from. That's me. So that's me with a wonderful person by the name of Von Barron. I do reenactments. I do. And so when I do reenactments, the only person I ever reenact is Susie King Taylor. So that's the two of us in Virginia. This is pre-COVID. And I'm essentially serving as the nurse to him as he's performing a procedure. This is a little anachronistic. So, would you have had a scene like this? Probably not. And so that's just sort of like interesting to think about what that would have looked like at the time. But that's me being a Civil War nurse. So in the beginning with my research, I started out with early research of Robert Gould Shaw and the 54th Massachusetts. I did my research at Princeton and then at Harvard University at the School of Public Health. And my research focused primarily on scholarship of Dr. Augusta, including the National Medical Association article that I did that was referenced, and I also did a National Medical Association poster. And I really looked at I also looked at the legal implications of the Emancipation Proclamation, and how that helped African American and African Canadian physicians to be able to get commissions during the war. And that led to a history press manuscript and then ultimately the book. Now, I'm curious when you look at the cover of this book. Now, keep in mind, this is a book about Black medicine during the Civil War. What strikes you about the cover of this book, and particularly the picture on the cover? If anybody would like to comment.
Hey, Heather, if you could put it in presentation mode, because right
Oh,
now, if you get a
yes,
quick
I
slideshow,
can. Yes.
the top right corner, I think if you just
I
hit
just did
slide,
that a minute ago. Yes.
perfect. Thank
Like
you.
I just did it. Did anything strike you about this picture? It's a picture of nurses at TV. I wish that would, if I had figured that out 10 years ago, I would just call me a future thinker. No, it's not a picture of nurses at Seaview. Okay, the color of the nurses, okay. Uh, no mask, all black, yeah, okay. And we still got like a little bit of like who's in the picture, okay. Um, all of those things are true. The other thing I wanted to point out is that there are nurses in this picture. So one thing that's really, and actually in the next slide, you'll understand where it's from. So I love, I'm telling you that, in retrospect, I mean, obviously I would have loved for it to have been a sea view picture. But this was an operating room around 1900 at the Frederick Douglass Memorial Hospital in Philadelphia. The creation of Freeman's Hospital in Washington and the work of the early African-American medical workers in Washington helped lead to a national infrastructure of African-American medicine. And this is courtesy of the National Library of Medicine. So the interesting thing about that picture is when I was thinking about what I wanted to have in terms of a picture for the book, I was very, very clear that what I wanted was obviously African American healthcare workers, they had to be on the cover. But for Civil War era, that's a pretty hard feat to achieve. It was challenging enough for me to be able to get pictures of the pictures that I got. Very challenging. So I talked with my editor, and he had what I thought was a pretty incredible idea. So he said to me, look, your book focuses on Black nurses, Black surgeons, Black stewards. And so maybe what you should think about is having a picture that spans across time. So it's not rooted in 1863, but it's in the early 1900s. And really what your book makes a case for, and it does very nicely, is that the stories that we learn about from the 1860s, they travel across time, and they're stories that have an import on the legacy of medicine in the 1900s and, the 2000s to present day. And I really love that from a philosophical standpoint, and that's what we went through. So even though the picture is from 1900, to me, it roots the book in a legacy of history over time. And as we're talking about the nurses we're talking about now at Seaview, I I hope that it does justice to what I was trying to carry off with my editor, which is to make it clear. And I get this question sometimes with my book too. I bet Maria gets it. She probably gets a little bit less than me, but I get the question of, well, why do we care? Why is it important? Why do we even need to know these stories? That happened in the past. And the answer I give is what we just talked about, is because what happened in 1863 informs what happens in 1900 at Frederick Douglass Memorial Hospital. It informed what happened in 1944 at Seaview, informed what happened to 2024 at New York Presbyterian. So these things they don't exist in a vacuum. And hopefully the picture and the thinking of that makes that clear. All right, so this is This is where my research really started, was looking at the medical picture for African American soldiers during the Civil War. I was exquisitely interested in that. And that journey took me to looking at the psychological and physical picture of African Americans during the Civil War, which took me to really think about psychological trauma of slavery, physical distress of enslavement, and various studies looking at height and weight charts for African American adolescents during slavery. My contention, which wasn't super novel, was basically just if you had been enslaved for years and years and years, and your ancestors have been enslaved and their ancestors have been enslaved, you probably wouldn't have a really robust healthcare picture going into the Civil War as soldiers. And that bore itself out. So African American soldiers comported themselves with much bravery and courage, which when you think about what they had to deal with and what they were coming from, I would say is even more impressive, to be honest with you. So that led to my interest in looking at the care that Black soldiers got. And there's several examples of the thoughts that nurses who cared for Black soldiers had about them. With those thoughts, I think Walt Whitman is one person. I don't know if we all know that these people were nurses. So Walt Whitman was a nurse during the Civil War, and has a lot of thoughts about Black troops and their care. Louisa May Alcott, Clara Barton, also nurses with interesting thoughts about the care. And in the book, actually, chapter 5 of the book is devoted solely to Civil War nurses that were African American during the war. That was important to me because I felt that I spent a lot of time dealing with African American surgeons. And so having a part of the book that was devoted to them actually seemed sort of critical to me. And so I spent a decent amount of time also talking about providers after the war. But that chapter 3, the second part of chapter 3 speaks to the nurses during the war, and including people that you probably have heard of, Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth, and then nurses that you may not have heard of, like Maria Tolliver and Jane Isabella Saunders. So that was important, and I think the book is better because of it. Also, pension records were what I sort of poured over at length. And so learning more about these nurses through the pension records was actually very illustrative and helpful to the work that I did. So I'm going to quickly just go through Dr. Augusta's life because he's sort of the muse for the book. And obviously, he had a lot of time that he spent with all sorts of healthcare workers. And then I'm going to actually just go through my chapter of the book. So for this book talk, I was assigned, as it were, part 4. And so I'm going to talk about that and look at some of the ways that some of that book references what happened during that time to modern day issues. And then we're going to open it up to some questions. So Alexander Augusta, born March 8th, 1825 in Norfolk, Virginia, moved to Baltimore in the 1840s, attempted to gain entry to UPenn, but was denied admittance. He worked with Dr. William Gibson of University of Pennsylvania. And then he got married in 1847. He ended up in Toronto, where he got his Bachelor of Medicine degree with full honors from Trinity Medical College. He and his wife had by all accounts, very successful life in Toronto. And then when the Emancipation Proclamation came to be formally on January 1st, 1863, Augusta contacted President Lincoln to obtain an appointment as a physician with the Union Army. It would take him until April of 1863 to actually get a commission. So he finally got a commission, which, by the way, was rare. The majority of Black surgeons that served during the war, they did not get a commission. So they were contract surgeons. He served at Camp Barker in Washington, D.C., and then Freeman's Hospital, which would later be Howard University Medical. And was something of a civil rights leader, was an advocate for equality. This is a railway incident that he was involved in where he was thrown off a trolley car, and then ended up writing a letter about that incident, which led to the desegregation of trolley cars in Washington, D.C. So something of a Rosa Parks of his day. And then this just talks a little bit about his work at Howard University, Freeman's Hospital, and then medical societies. This is something that's a theme for the Black Angels as well. It seems like the medical societies oftentimes just can't get the acts together. can't get it together, right? There's the AMA, the ANA. I don't know. They just can't. All of these three initial organizations can't pull it together. So the AMA was one of them, you know, just took them a minute or hundreds of years. And so what do these people do? What did the Black nurses do? What did Augusta do? You start your own medical society. Yeah, you can't get in. Just don't wait around, start your own. So that's what Augusta did. And I mentioned the one that he started here. And then he was not one of the founders of the NMA because he died the same year that it was created. But right, don't wait around, start your own. Exactly. Thank you, Joanna. Succinct and to the point. So he didn't start the NMA, he wasn't one of the founders, but he definitely paved the way for the NMA to come into existence. Dr. Augusta died in 1890, and he's buried at Arlington Cemetery. This is, I actually think is a beautiful, what's after a tombstone? Because that's kind of like what it is. But it's beautiful, and it speaks to his life and his life's work. So that's beautiful. So Civil War era takeaways, African Americans entered the wartime effort uniquely from a healthcare perspective. They had a difficult fight in order to be able to serve in the war. This is the nurses, the doctors, the students, everybody, and like wrap your head around that for a second, that you are desperate to serve your country, to be able to show your might, show your bravery, show a lot of things. And your country says to you, no, thank you. We don't want you. Just wrap your head around that for a second. That's something to think about. I would also wrap my head around the fact that, remember, Augusta was living in Toronto, having a great life. His wife was a seamstress. He owned a pharmacy. They had a lovely life. And he removed himself and his wife. And I always think those must have been interesting conversations. Wife like, oh, why are we going back to that country? But he removes himself and his wife from this lovely life they're having. And they go back to the United States for him to serve in the army of a country that would not allow him to get his medical degree. That's what we're talking about here. All right, so the Civil War was an entry point for many African American health providers to make a career for themselves post-war. That's what Augusta never went back. He never went back. He never went back to Canada, stayed here the rest of his life. African Americans, from soldiers to nurses to physicians, were a vital part of the success of the war. They were the success of the war. I mean, they really were. They were the success of the war. So I just want to take a minute and thank my department for this class that I teach. So based on that book, I was asked to create a class called Untold Stories. And you can see, one of our wonderful, nursing heroes here, who we're going to talk about in a minute. But I started the class a couple of years ago. And basically what it does is we teach students about untold stories, and about people whose stories have not been written and songs have not been sung. And students are the ones that pick their own stories. So the first few weeks of the class, we teach you how to write a story, what that's like. We have somebody from the oral history department talk about doing an oral history. We have somebody from narrative medicine that teaches students how to do a narrative medicine. The rest of the class is theirs. They have to do the work of finding the untold story. And again, think about that. It's hard to find the absence of something. When there's very little about something, to be able to find it is hard. So they find the story, they tell it, and then this is the part I love. I get like all giddy about it. They get published. So we have worked with Columbia's Academic Commons, and the students get a academic publication. They get a DOI number, the whole bit, and they publish. Now, the super exciting thing, and I think once I say this, then I mean, my department is lovely, so I'm sure they're happy, with this. But my department has indicated to me that this year we're going to create a living memorial or a living wall, a living space in our entire department to the Untold Stories class. And we will have pictures and easels and videos and recordings and all in our department devoted to the Untold Stories class and these untold stories. So I'm pretty elated about that. And obviously, we will be featuring nurses. That goes without saying. By the way, I love this Zoom room. Can I just stay here? Because it's so affirming. I'm just gonna stay in here forever with all of you. Okay, so I want to thank Joanna Seltzer, who wrote a fabulous article for medium.com about Mary Eliza Mahoney, who you see right here, right? So, and it was important that I had a picture of her. So this right here is the website. So the class has a website. That's the website below. So it has a website. And so it was important that obviously that nurses were prominently displayed and featured in this. The book I wrote was about healthcare providers, so it spans the gamut. But I just love this article. It's really fabulous. The link is below. Props. And actually, it's funny because when I was doing the research, it's the first article that came up. I was like, I know her. I know Joanna. So it was not, I didn't have to like search, I'd have to go very far on Google or any other search engines to find it. It's the one that pops up. So it tells a really beautiful story about Mary Eliza Mahoney, someone everybody should know, because I'm a Civil War person. It's, her story is one that I tell and I talk about, so important. And then as I was talking before we got on here, I watched all the other sessions and then I just took some nuggets from each of them. And I thought I would just share some things in particular that were interesting. So one of the questions that was asked in the session with Black Student Nurses, the Black Student Nurses Association at Hopkins, was in your nursing education where you taught about experiences and challenges faced by Black nurses in history. And so, I mean, pretty much, everybody's responses were no. No, absolutely not. One person said, absolutely not. And so Faith Metlock, who was one of the speakers, had a really, I think, poignant comment, which was our charge, teach the next generation. That is our charge. That's absolutely right. This was a comment that someone said this topic was barely touched upon. As a nurse educator, I am hoping to change that by incorporating the stories of Black nursing history and active anti-racism content into my courses. And Faith's response to that, which I mean should be on some sort of a billboard, is we are all charged with the responsibility of now that we know, sharing this with others and using it in our platform, our roles in these spaces to make sure the next generation is aware of these challenges that had to be overcome. I mean, I probably could have just started and ended my conversation with that. Like, mic drop, the end. Do I really need to say anything else? I don't think so. So that's beautiful. We are all charged with that now. It's our responsibility. We can't wait for anybody else. Whether it's a class I teach, you telling a story about, one of these nurses, spreading the word. We all have, once we know, we can't pretend we don't know anymore. We have to spread the word. All right, so the last part, and I will zip through this and then we're going to open it up, is I just wanted to take some time to talk about the book. It's a great book. Mine, I don't know about y'all, but like mine is all like got all these notes that I have in it. And, I got like all stuff marked up and so forth. So, if you haven't read it, I mean, it's the read of the century. It's great. And I'm even saying that when my book's sitting next to me, I'm like, put that right on top of it. It's the read. It's lyrical, it's incredible, it's beautiful, it's poignant. I mean, it's everything, if you've ever written a book and you read this, and you're like, that's the goal. That's the goal. So it's a beautiful book. So I thought I'd just take about 5 minutes just to go over some themes of the book that I think make sense and resonate, and carry over through time. And then I'll stop sharing and we'll open it up. So, part four, talks about 1944 to 1949. And I'm gonna put my thing back on in a second. Let me put that back on, share. But it speaks to the themes for like a very short period of time. And so, as we think about that, and as we think about the themes from 1944 to 1949, some of the themes that come up include the war and TB soldiers. There were so many now. The war was sending home more and more TB infected soldiers who we feared might start an epidemic. Where would they go? So CVU was operating above capacity, various drugs are being tested, for anybody who like is or is not familiar, a lot of what was happening then had also to do with the wartime effort and penicillin. So if you sort of know your like research atrocities history, this is Tuskegee, right? And penicillin. So we have sort of the specter of that mulling around, okay? And then research human subject testing. And this talks, I mean, the book does a beautiful job talking about human subject testing and the testing that happened at Seaview. And the physicians could arbitrarily decide the trial parameters. I worked for years doing human subject research, and I can tell you that that would be unacceptable now for physicians, for researchers just kind of be able to do whatever they wanted to do. We now have the Code of Federal Register and other codes, but then it was perfectly acceptable. Potter's Field here in New York, which is discussed at length. The graveyard for people who were impoverished, and how people, like Nurse Meadows Walker tried to treat those individuals with care. It was challenging. These themes are, and I love there was a comment that Joanna made at the end of the last session. She was like, these themes continue. They don't go away. We're not living in, 2024 where the themes aren't still there. That's why the history is important, because we see the same themes. Some of them change, some of them get better, some of them are the same. And then tuberculosis, I mean, there's a lot. I even talked with Maria about this when she came to Columbia, the overlap with tuberculosis and COVID. I mean, I feel like this line right here, you could be talking about COVID, dying alone in public, in front of eyes, on a bed and pillow where someone else had died, rusty nightstand. These are all, you could think about this from a modern standpoint of people dying alone. That's what happened during COVID. And so how much has changed and how much is the same? I thought this was really interesting in the book. And it starts on, page 239, talking about Staten Island's inability to be able to accept, Meadows into their midst. That was really tough. And as she tried to, buy a home, try to be a homeowner, just made impossible. And then, streptomycin, November 20th, 1949 is the day that becomes, it's a historical day, right? Draft nurse bill. So this is talked about in the book in terms of very similar to Emancipation Proclamation and Alexander Augusta and, the Black surgeons and Black nurses during the Civil War, having a moment when then they are able to practice their craft. Very, very similar situation. And then I don't know if Miss Allen is still here, but Miss Virginia Allen, her story begins to get told in part 4, with her arrival at Seaview from Detroit, Michigan. I love the way she's described in the book. 16, newly graduated from high school, no experience with children, but she was charismatic and easygoing. I mean, the charisma just continues on, doesn't it? She's still as charismatic as ever. And you know, the talks a lot about what Miss Allen dealt with in terms of, you know, the violence of patients who they didn't mean to be violent. They were children that she was dealing with, throwing of food, throwing of toys. But what was it centered in? They missed their families. They were homesick. They were depressed. They were lonesome. They were despondent. A child isn't going to act that way for no reason. And so the story tells the story of how Alan would read to the children. There was rationing of care, the administering of streptomycin. And as it's told of Alan and other nurses, care above all, care for these individuals. That's what they were about. And so I don't know, Miss Allen, if you want to add anything, but I was compelled by, you know, the story that starts in part 4 about you, continues on in the rest of the book. But I mean, it's there are parts that are told about you in other parts of the book, but you are introduced in the book in a meaningful way in part 4. And so I'm just curious if there's anything else you wanted to add.
The only thing that I would like to add would be that I'm very happy that the book was written and to highlight the heroic nurses who worked at Seaview during the time of tuberculosis and the founding of the cure. And I feel honored, really, to still be living now and being able to represent these nurses as a living person. I stand on the shoulders of some fantastic women.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you yourself are one of those fantastic women. So thank you for all you've done.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna really end there. This just is a interview I did about unsung heroes of unsung Black heroes of public health with Brian Lair on WNYC, where I was able to talk about some of this. This was before the book came out, so obviously I would have talked about the book if it were in existence. Dr. Augusta and Abbott got their day, at least a day. You know, they deserve way more, but they got a day with plaques in Toronto. And that's a really interesting story. I was proud to be the keynote speaker at this day in Toronto. And I want to thank Dr. Nab Prasad for inviting me. The plaques are going to be installed this year. So stay tuned for more about them. Here's the 2 books. I did a second book about healing Civil War veterans in New York and Washington, D.C. And that's all veterans. That's nurse veterans, that's surgical veterans. Those stories could have been written today, to be honest with you. They certainly could have been written in the time of Seaview. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and just thank you for allowing me the time to be here. And I appreciate all of you.
Thank you so much for really a riveting, incredible presentation. I actually would love to go really straight into audience and participant questions. One of the things that we had in the classroom was kind of like the guided question that connects to this part of the book. It was really Kismet, the way that you were explaining all the themes and how it weaves into all of your research. And kind of the question that we had, you know, thought would help guide the reading when it comes to part 4 is how we were learning, you know, how the Seaview nursing shortages in this section were often filled with friends and family. And we are introduced to Edna's niece, Miss Virginia Allen.
Right.
And this part of the book also delves into this victory, this incredible victory that started in the early 1900s by the National Association of Colored Graduate Nurses to actually get to mid-century and desegregate the U.S. Army Nurse Corps. So having all of the foundation that you laid in terms of what was happening in the Civil War and everything at that time and the barriers that people were facing. But at the same time, even though the U.S. Army Nurse Corps desegregated in the late 1940s, the ANA did not. And so that remained an elusive issue that was ongoing within our profession.
Can I just say, Joanna, it's outrageous. I mean, I can't say it any more clearly than that. And when you think of somebody like, a Virginia Allen or an Alexander Augusta, these people they weren't just some, people with sort of like no kind of training, no kind of understanding. These were talented individuals. That's where, racism is completely irrational, because for someone to not want to get treatment from somebody like that, it has to be irrational. It just has to be irrational. So I think we just need to call that out too, because, we're talking about people who were highly talented. And to think that they were subjected to this, and also that they weren't able to, in all the ways they wanted to perform their craft, their talent, it's just outrageous. So I just wanted to say that before I got the hook and left.
No, not at all. We're hooking you in by all means. And so I really wanted to allow the audience to be able to just engage directly with you, to engage with
Sure.
Miss Virginia, because I think what we really saw in this part of the book is these themes of hope and perseverance and victories and then continued obstacles. So I did throw it in the chat, but really, I want to give everyone a chance to digest either things you've read, things that Heather just talked about. And this way, you can really share kind of what it's bringing up for you in the present day, or how learning about the past is informing kind of where you are today. I see Christina, I believe, has her hands up. But you can also
morning.
feel free to come up.
Hi, Joanna. Good morning. I'm sorry I'm not on camera. I'm trying to save you all from me. I'm from San Francisco, and I thank you, Professor, so much for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. I have just a comment. First of all, I attended a session this week about racism and patience, and it was incredibly enlightening. It was
I think you went on mute.
Christina, I think.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So it was just a great session, because you mentioned that at the end, right? About people, like, how crazy is that you don't want to be cared for someone who people keep telling you is an incredible clinician. And okay. So right. I would love to hear from you just a minute, if you don't mind. I need to have hope about the future of healthcare, because it's not real hope right now. It's a really tough time. I know who I'm speaking to. Tell me about the student, that class. Everybody on the Zoom was commenting on that class. We all got excited. I feel comfortable saying we all did. Yeah.
Well, who are
the students? Go ahead.
Yeah, it starts on Wednesday. Come on down.
Oh my God. I wish I don't know.
Yeah, it starts on Wednesday. So it's second quarter class here at Columbia. So I'm in the health policy management department here at the School of Public Health. So health policy management students can take it. Anybody can take it, actually. You just need permission if you're in another school. We also get some students in some of the other tracks. It's a 7-week course. The first week, we basically just the first 2 weeks are really devoted to understanding what an untold story is. Or I said to somebody once, really, they're probably like incomplete stories, and they're like, that's not a good title. Just stick with untold story. stick with that title. So they're probably like, and some stories, I mean, I always say to this, there's over 7,000 books that have been written about George Washington. And I'm like, but people keep coming up with new stories about George Washington, right? So, when you think about like all the stories that can be told about somebody or something or some episode, it's all perspective, right? Stories are somewhat subjective. So, the class is great. It's really fun. You know, I really enjoy teaching it. And like I said, it runs for 7 weeks, and I'm happy to sort of brainstorm about, and we're actually, like I mentioned, we're gonna do you know, a series of events around it, and we're doing virtual projects too. I'm actually gonna do a virtual session, a couple of them, where we basically teach people how to do their own untold stories. You'll probably like this. I got a grant from the provost office here at Columbia to
Yeah.
expand the project even more. So we have a call out for untold stories. So over the next 9 months, I'm doing a call for anybody's untold story. So if you've got one, let's hear it, Christina. Like, I want to hear it. I'm ready for
Oh,
your.
I got somebody I want to hook you up with.
Let's go, Christina. Let's go.
Okay, you're a doll. Thank you so much. You are a treasure.
Oh,
Thank you so
that's
much for coming
fine.
today.
Yeah, I'm
Love
just
it.
Christina. Next week you can come back next Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday because I'll still be here. I'm just not gonna
Oh.
Zoom, okay? So I won't be going anywhere.
We also have a question from Willa as well.
Okay.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear
Willa.
me? Because
Yeah.
I can't be seen.
Okay.
For whatever reason, I can be seen, but my computer is not acting up. But
Weird. It's like
anyways, I just wanted to say a few things. I'm so honored to always be here every Saturday. I want to humbly thank Miss Allen, because as I read, I have to digest, I have to put it down, but it takes me back to, I worked the AIDS epidemic. I was a nurse about 10 years, and I worked the agency, and I was always the nurse that was at the bottom of the hall, at the end of the hall with the dying patients at two of the major hospitals in Washington, D.C. And it always takes me back to the stories in my mind, because when AIDS came out, we didn't know. And the only difference for me in terms of AIDS and COVID is that we had enough PPEs. But we didn't know, so I would don everything, and I had a small child, so I always made sure that I took precautions. But what I really want to humbly thank Miss Virginia Allen and the nurses before her about their level of infection control practices and dealing with the chain of infection. When I'm reading the book, I'm always thinking about that. Like, that must have been horrendous, because I can remember, as I said, with the AIDS epidemic. This is wonderful. And I want to thank you, Dr. Bussey. All of this has inspired me so, as a child growing up in a segregated place in South Florida. I can just remember stories in my mind I've always wanted to tell. And I'm 65 now, and I'm just at that age where I feel like I'm 18 again, and I know that I must tell these stories. Thank you.
I love it. And the thing I wanted to say, which is somebody mentioned in the chat about high school students, I've worked with some. I'd like to work with a lot more. And I don't know if y'all saw, but the chancellor's office here in New York, like yesterday, basically put out a revision of how we're going to teach African American history from basically sort of almost like an untold stories vantage point and lens. It's super exciting. So I think now there's a mechanism to move forward with teaching high school students, at least here in New York. And if people have other ideas about high school students, college students, middle school students, out the boom students, you know, I think we should think about it. So it was lovely to hear your comments. And I mean, there's really not enough I can personally say about Miss Virginia Allen, beyond that she's incredible. But this is what I'm talking about. Incredible, not just because she's a lovely person, but when you look at her nursing practices and how she practiced, I mean, who in the world wouldn't want her to be their nurse? I would. I would. So, yeah, I appreciate your comments, and I think you're right on. I feel like we're at time, but I could be wrong. Oh, Mindy. Oh, I'm sorry, Joanna. I'm like I just started taking over like moderator.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, Mindy, get your question in, please.
This is not my Zoom.
Oh, yeah, Mindy, please feel free to ask
Mindy.
your question.
Yes. Oops. Mindy, are you able to talk?
Boy, I'm trying to. So I'm going to stay off camera too, because COVID has not done well for me today. But One thing that this is going to sound very remedial because again, comprehension's not good. I've been doing the audiobook as well because I think that this book is robust and it's powerful. And so I need all the media sources to come to my brain. But the thing that made me a little bit sad, and I know this is going to sound silly, but like when the scientists were doing their sort of studies, and I forget which group of scientists went to another group of scientists lab, and they were disgusted with how pathetic their their cleanliness and all this. But I'm like, the scientists were smart enough to protect against the magnitude of this disease. But the nurses there was no consideration for the nurses at the bedside who were getting spat on and everything. So I don't know, it just kind of made me mad. Like the people at the lab were very well protected and they had that wherewithal, but it didn't trickle down to the bedside. And I just thought that was a little ignorant. You know what I mean?
I think that's a really good point. I mean, part 4 talks a lot about, Mayo and Rutgers and these various physicians. I worked for years doing research admin, for the IRB. And, I mean, one thing about research versus clinical care is for research, there is even the sort of philosophy of it is sort of this, there's certain inclusion exclusion criteria and certain, I think also there's a huge racial issue with respect to it too, in terms of who was doing the thinking of the research versus who actually had to, do the research, because the nurses were involved in that too, versus also who was doing a lot of the on the ground clinical care. And so somebody asked about, is there hope? And I would say yes. I can't imagine having this talk when I was a child, to be honest with you. So I think we've moved, but we're a work in progress, all of us. And I think we need to strive to all do better, move forward, persevere, and have more conversations like this and continue to move the needle and continue to ask questions like all of you had asked, and what you said, Mindy, and what Willa said, what all of you have said. We need to forge ahead, persevere, so that we can continue to strive to do better. And I think if we can do that, then I think that's where the real hope lies.
And with that, mic drop from Professor Butts to close us out. Thank you all again. Thank you, Professor Butts, for just an amazing presentation. Thank you, Miss Virginia, for being here with us. Thank you, Joanna, for Nurses You Should Know. And also shout out to Joanna for really building out the Google Classroom. So if you haven't had the opportunity to navigate that space for additional learning and comprehension and engagement, please do so. But just thanking you all for spending another Saturday with us. We'll see you next Saturday, same time, same Zoom, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard. And you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.
Bye, everybody. Be in touch. Email me.
Bye, y'all. Bye.